Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Michelle Gay, co-founder and executive director of Safe and Sound Schools. Thanks for joining our summer webinar series, Return to Learn with Safe and Sound Schools. Since the start of the COVID crisis, we've been busy with school leaders, professionals, and community members researching, gathering, and developing resources and expert guidance to support schools across the country through this unprecedented time. We gathered our community in discussion through our spring web chat series, Tuesdays at the Table, our new podcast, The Sound Off, and we held groups of focus groups of stakeholders, from parents to students, school leaders to teachers, public safety, mental health, security, and health professionals to examine the pressing issues affecting our school communities. All of this has shaped our Return to Learn series, designed to help us all dive a little deeper and work a lot smarter as we prepare for the start of another challenging school year. Founded by parents who lost children at Sandy Hook School, Safe and Sound Schools is a national school safety advocacy and resource center that provides research-based tools and support for crisis prevention, response, and recovery, with the goal of protecting every school, every student, every day. We invite you to visit us at safeandsoundschools.org to learn more about our mission and support our work in schools and communities across the country. Before I introduce today's expert presenter, I want to recognize our supporting partner, Allegion, who's made this critically important webinar possible and free to our national community. We'll have Ken Cook join us from Allegion for the Q&A portion of the webinar to say hi and to lend his expertise to the conversation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, John McDonald, Executive Director of Security and Emergency Management for the Jeffco Public Schools, Safe and Sound Advisor, and speaker. Thanks for being with us today, John.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I am deeply appreciative of Safe and Sound Schools hosting these conversations and really creating a platform for a national conversation as we look at returning to learn this fall. You know, for years I've been saying that our world is not a scary place, it's just very uncertain. And that is true. But we also know that COVID-19 is adding to the uncertainty of daily life like we've never seen before. And when we think about what that means in our school world, the challenges are pretty significant. And there's no doubt that there's a coming wave. Between COVID-19 and social justice issues occurring across the country, the pressures of school life for students that haven't been involved in school activities or on location in almost 6 months, there's a lot of stressors that are going to come back. And this is really a trifecta that we have to pay close attention to, because what happens when you have that kind of pressure in a student's life can really be devastating if we're not hyper aware and paying attention to the needs, both the social emotional needs of our kids, as well as the physical safety and security, and of course the health safety. You know, no matter the size of the community, whether you're a large metro school district, whether you live in a rural area, our parents all have the same demand of our schools, and they're not afraid to share those demands. They want to know that their child is going to be safe and educated. They want to know that their child, when they come to our school, are going to be as safe and happy as when they left home. And that safety component has to happen before a child is educated. We know from studies that a student that does not feel safe in a school is not a well-educated student. And when we talk about safety, we're also talking about health safety, not just physical safety from threat of violence. We're now talking about this new threat of our time with Corona. And they go together. There is a real complexity in terms of safety and security, the feeling that our kids need to have some structure, need to understand that the adults are going to protect them and provide the best learning environment possible. Because truly, Every child deserves to go to school that's free from threat or intimidation. And that's what we're trying to provide here. I believe that there's no higher calling than protecting our most vulnerable population, our kids. And that opportunity to protect our students each and every day is truly an honor for all of us. And it's something that we take seriously. Our kids deserve no less. And for our parents that entrust in us to provide their students that safe school learning environment, we owe it to them to do so. You know, the world of crisis is often defined within a period of time. I break it down into what I call the fives: 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks. You got 5 minutes of life-saving protocols that have to be implemented to reduce the life safety risk. Within 5 hours, your practices and protocols are going to be defined, and you're going to know whether you were successful or not in everything that you implemented over the past years. Within 5 days, you're going to know what your recovery is going to look like and what your new normal may now be like. And in 5 weeks, your new normal is going to redefine your school district or your school. So moments in time are really critical. And when we think of crisis management work, we have to understand that COVID-19 is no longer in the fives. This is truly the longest crisis event in a lifetime. And when I look at this and see what we've been through over the last several months and what's projected over the next coming months, the challenges for schools and community are going to be significant. We have to be consistent in our approach. We have to be collaborative in how we manage this crisis, because this is really all about rebuilding what we lost just a few months ago. I had a realization as I was thinking about how we manage COVID. And there's so much opportunity to look at, you know, what we've learned from past threats and see how it's applicable for the COVID crisis of today. Many of the practices and protocols are very similar. You know, for threat management, we look at accountability and active monitoring. And when we talk about COVID management, it's also about accountability and active monitoring, because you can't win if you're not holding that threat accountable and you're not actively monitoring it so you know what's happening in your environment. When we manage threats, say for instance, we have a student making a threat, we put a safety plan in place, check in with the staff, we search the student, we have restricted movements, assigned seating, lunch and restroom restrictions. And then if it's not safe for the student to be in the school, we suspend. When we manage COVID, we're also going to be doing check-in with staff. We're going to be doing temperature checks instead of a search, for example. Restricted movements in place, assigned seating, lunch and restroom restrictions. And then if it's not safe to be in the school, we're going to remote learning. So there's a lot that we can learn from the past. Now, obviously, there are significant differences also, and we have to pay attention to those. But we don't need to rewrite the entire book. And I'll share with you that when we were first aware of COVID and we stood up our incident command system in our district, there was a realization that I'm not the best person to lead this crisis. I don't know anything about a pandemic. I know very little about public health. I know about threat management, though. So when I spoke with our superintendent, my recommendation was, I'm going to check my ego at the door, and I'm recommending that we bring in our director of health services as the incident commander for this COVID crisis. She's much more of an authority. She has a background and an understanding in the relationships with public health that I just don't. And it's really been an important aspect of our preparedness and response to have somebody that can lead with fidelity and that can lead with an understanding of what the issues are and speaks the public health language. I can speak law enforcement language pretty well. I can speak a little fire language pretty well. Public health, though, is truly not in my wheelhouse. We cannot be afraid to check our egos at the door and say, we're not the one. But my role today is making sure that I'm a supportive part of the incident command team and helping to guide decisions and also sharing lessons learned so that experiences of the past can also be used in the present as we find our way through all of this. You know, we talk about when are you going to be safer at home? Should we stay at home? Well, frankly, the intel and the environment are going to dictate our operational tactics and decisions. That's the way it should always be. If you try to have your operational tactics and decisions define how you operate without the necessary intel, without understanding your environment, you're going to lose. And we can't afford that. So pay attention to the intel. What do we know right now? What is our environment? What can we do and what can't we do? And if you follow that process, your success rate is going to be so much better than if you chose to go a different direction. The impact of our decisions, even the smallest decision, can really have a rippling effect. And if we don't communicate and collaborate well, our community is going to feel that. So it is incredibly important that we look at our decision making, that we do and we demand an honest assessment with our teams. The first question you have to ask is it safe to go back? Every community is going to be a little different. You're going to have to make that decision based on your environment. What's the intel and what's your environment in your community? Are your COVID cases through the roof? Have they receded to the point where it's not an issue? Can you manage your environment if you have an outbreak? All these questions have to be asked. But the fundamental question always goes back to, is it safe? When we manage any type of crisis, and especially this COVID crisis, we have to be consistent. You have to be able to sustain the expectations that you set forth for your community, for your kids, for your staff, and for your parents. If you can't sustain the expectations, then you're not going to be consistent, and failing to live up to that standard is going to cause chaos. And again, it becomes a lack of trust. And that's going to be a common theme throughout this because we owe it to our community. Once we set the expectations that we follow through all the time, we model that behavior. If we say we're going to temperature check, we temperature check every person every day as they come into the building. One of the questions you're going to have to ask yourself is, if we return to a school, can we have effective learning, or is it going to be more disruptive than if we stayed out? And I think that honest assessment that we're going to be doing, that everybody needs to do, we have to be able to answer this question and communicate that with our community. What good is it to bring us kids back to a school if effective learning is not taking place? How can you ensure that effective learning is taking place if you keep them out of school? So whatever decision you make, you still have to answer that question. And then there's the issue that nobody likes to talk about, but it's always out there. I'm not talking about the financial liability so much as I'm talking about the public relations liability. What's the liability? What's the public outcry? What is your community demanding? What will they tolerate? And your decisions shouldn't be necessarily defined by this, but you've got to be aware of it. And I think it's really important because when you're aware of it and the voice of your community is speaking, if you don't answer their questions, then we have limited ability to really come back in an impactful and positive way. You're going to have to do a self-check. And certainly I believe in this for myself and my own team, and our district does this. And doing the right thing is not the problem. Knowing what the right thing is, that's the challenge sometimes. For the most part, we know what the right thing is. It's not always easy to do, but doing the right thing, it's critically important, especially when you understand that, all this planning that we're doing for the last several months and will continue to do, it's all going to lead to an uncertain road in the COVID world. So uncertainty really causes people to have significant stressors, and it just adds on to the component of mental health that we fought so hard for so many years to make sure that our kids and our staff have the help when they need the help. You heard me say it earlier. This is about trust. So be transparent about what you're doing. Share with your community what you're doing and why you're doing it. If you do that and they're on board, the partnership and the ability to do amazing things will always be in front of you. You're always going to have naysayers. There's always going to be that segment of the population that doesn't believe in what you're doing. You know what? Communicate, be transparent. They may not like you, but they will respect the fact that you're making good decisions and you're paying attention to that intel and your environment. I've noticed that parents and staff have little patience for lack of communication. Now, sometimes we over communicate as well. We have to be cautious of this. We have to find that balance. But if you're going to close a school, we owe it to our community to explain why, explain where the decision making came from, how we reached it, and we're going to have to do that in a clear and concise way. They don't want to read a 6-page report. They want to understand quickly, and they want to understand what the impact is for their family, because there is no doubt it's a significant impact. And every decision we make right now seems to bring out really strong emotions. Something as simple as a mask or not wearing a mask is a national debate now. And we have to follow the science, pay attention to the experts in our public health community, and manage through that, because that is the crisis. We always manage through the crisis for the threat that's in front of us right now. We know the COVID-19 threat is in front of us right now. What are the mitigation strategies? What is our preparedness and our response? Wearing a mask is it, then you wear the mask. But that means that everybody wears the masks, including teachers and administrators, school resource officers, our transportation personnel, our lunch people. Everybody models this behavior, and we do it consistently and continually. We know that there's a split community right now. People are arguing about whether we go back to school. We go in remote learning, or we do a hybrid of both. Those are decisions for your community. Understand that not everybody's going to be happy all the time. Your job isn't to make 100% of the people happy. Our job is to provide a quality education and an environment that is welcoming and educational for our kids. And I think that's something we have to strive for every single day. You are going to set the expectations for safety. So you're going to be holding people accountable. Accountability starts with every leader in a school or in a district. This is really important. You know what? Before kids come back to school, set the expectations for a COVID world in your code of conduct. Let them know what they're agreeing to before they walk in the doors. If you expect them to wear masks, if you expect social distancing, if you expect hand washing, put it in your code of conduct and make sure that they agree to these conditions. Because some parents, if they struggle with this, if they don't appreciate it, approve of it, if they say we're not doing that, then you've got to have that conversation today about educational opportunities outside of the school that they were attending. This also allows us to hold people accountable when they continue to defy those expectations. We know we're going to have kids that struggle with the ability to comply, and we can manage that because that's what schools do all day long, is manage the behavior of students. But when it gets to the point where it's egregious and it's unsafe, then we have to be able to rely on that code of conduct to take action. I think everybody needs to plan on pivoting this year. At a moment's notice, you may have to go into full remote learning. You may have to come out of it and go into school. You may choose a hybrid. Throughout the year, we may be in and out of remote learning. And I would highly suggest that whatever your plan is, that you have a plan B in the background that allows you to quickly transition from one to the other throughout the year. Because if you don't do that, if you don't have the capability of doing that, especially at this time, parents are going to say, what have you been doing the last 6 months? It took you long enough when COVID first hit to then transition to remote learning. Why is it taking you that long now? So if we do that prep work ahead of time and we sit down with our educators, our operational personnel, our IT groups, now we're ahead of where we were last year, and we can make that rapid transition as we need to. We have a new normal happening. We see it in face masks or in the clear plexiglass that's being put up in schools, and the hand washing and the social distancing. We don't know if that new normal is going to last for a semester, if it's going to last for the rest of the year, or could it be the next 3 to 5 years? But we have to adapt to the new normal today before we go back to school. And we have to do it in a way that our students understand that, once again, we're being emergency prepared, not emergency scared. We're prepared for a healthy school year. And we're prepared to do that in a way that requires us to maybe look a little different. And that can be a stressor for kids. We have to be aware of that. One of the questions you're going to have to ask is, before you ever get to the classroom, before you even get to the school, how are you going to get kids there? What does your busing look like? We're being told right now that a bus that can typically hold 75, we can maybe get 26 on a bus. Well, then the question you all have to ask yourself is, are we going to do temperature checks before kids get on the bus? What happens if a sick student gets on a bus? What happens if you do the temp check and you have a little 6-year-old who's got a temperature and mom and dad aren't there? We can't leave them behind. So what do we do with them? One district I talked to has a sweeper bus, as they call it, where they're going to drive around and pick up kids that have temperatures so that they're not left alone at the bus stop. What they haven't figured out yet is where they're going to put the kids. If mom and dad are already at work, what do we do with them until they can come and get picked up? Entering school this year is going to take a lot more time and a lot more staff. We're going to be doing temperature checks. We're going to ask screening questions to make sure that everybody is safe before they get into the school. That welcoming environment versus that fortress building mentality that we've talked about for years in the world of school safety because of active shooter issues still applies to COVID-19 issues. When you welcome a student back and you hold a thermometer to their head and you're asking them if they have a fever, cough, or sore throat, that changes your welcoming environment a bit, doesn't it? What I would say, though, is that the welcoming environment doesn't come from the procedures. It comes from the kindness of the staff towards the students. We can still be kind. We can still be caring. We can still be that smiling, happy face that while they may not be able to see that smile, they can feel it. And we can welcome kids back into a safe environment. What happens when you get that red alert and you have a student that's got a fever? Question you have to ask yourself is, do we really have a fever? We know, and we're finding out that at any given day, up to 20% of the thermometers may not be accurate due to hot weather, cold weather. So if you have a student with a fever, you may need to sit them down and take their temperature again in 4 or 5 minutes. Did they run to school? Were they playing around outside before they got their temperature checked? So there's a lot that goes into this. Now, if they do have a fever, we're going to put them until mom and dad can come pick them up. So every school is going to have to think about creating their own medical safe room in an area that can be socially distanced with a significant amount of space. It's going to be really important that we set up a reunification process so when the parents come back to pick the kids up after they've been notified that their child has a fever, that we are escorting the student outside while wearing PPE to the parent and not bringing the parent into the school environment. We will be limiting our visitor entry into schools this year. And that will obviously prove to be a challenge as well. Setting the room has just this entirely new meaning. I've always been in awe of our teachers that almost have a science behind how they set their room up. They know what they want to maximize student engagement, to maximize teacher effectiveness. And now we're asking them to set the room to socially distant. And that's a change. And it's going to take our teachers and our kids a while to get used to that. They will get used to it, but it doesn't necessarily promote that classroom that we all think about and hope for, but that's the new normal. And socially distancing our kids from each other and from our teachers, it'll redefine student engagement. There's no question about it. One of the things that we're hearing today is a move towards outdoor classrooms, which in nice weather can be great. And with that, though, does come some pretty significant security concerns. How are you going to position the classroom so they can't be seen from the street? How do you ensure that we have the ability to quickly bring our kids back into a school and lock down if we need to, if there's a threat outside. What does that look like? What does your monitoring process look like to look for threats? Because we're no longer inside of a contained environment. We're now bringing our kids outside for several hours a day, and that poses some risk. How do you manage restroom breaks when a student needs to go to the restroom and we may not have enough staff to escort them in and out of the building? What does that process look like? These are all questions you're going to have to ask yourself. But remember, they need to be asked today and not tomorrow when we start school. 2020-2021 school year, we will see great pressure on an educational system that thrives on consistency. The more consistent the environment, the better for student learning. And now we're upending it. We're turning the whole thing on its head. And that is a challenge that people are struggling with. Administrators, staff, and soon students and parents alike. We can work through it. It just requires that we give each other some grace and that we have patience and that we collaborate, communicate. If you do all of that, then you can work through this, and you can do so in a powerful way. We know that too many fail to believe when the threat is real. We've seen it for so many years. We understand that in a school environment, we have to manage and focus on the threat that's in front of us right now. And that means that we focus on this COVID threat. We pay attention to what this is all about because our kids deserve that. So does our staff. We cannot falter. You remember nothing else. I say, please remember, we believe the threat until it's over. The cost of losing a life in a school, and I'm not talking about financial cost here, I'm talking about the cost to your entire school body, staff and students emotionally, and frankly, it's just a lifetime of concern that we don't want to have to address this year. So what I'd say is, please, you follow some of these protocols, you manage the threat that you know, you put the processes in place that have the ability to significantly deter and mitigate the risk. And you know that at the end of the day, we do all that we can to protect our kids. And if we do that, then we can hold our head high knowing that we have a system in place that honors the educational process while providing a safe environment as well. COVID is not going to replace the threats of the past. I worry, and I think that we have to have an open, honest conversation here about what all the pressures are going to do and what happens when that student makes a threat. What happens when, the threat of violence is now in the midst of the threat of COVID and those two merge. We have to pay attention to our threat management protocols and practices. And we got to get really tight on our district emergency response practices. So you tighten that up, have conversations early with your staff and be ready. We've been out of this for a while now, and it's hard to just flip a switch and become that first responder when you need to. So we've got to get our mindsets correct here. This year, we will be doing modified drills. And I think modified drills are really important. They support the muscle memory from the past decade of drills that we've all been doing. This year, we will be doing a lockdown drill that keeps kids in the desk. We'll still play the lockdown announcement. We want the kids to hear that. We'll make sure we say it's a drill so we don't scare anybody. We'll have the teachers lock the classroom doors, shut the lights off. We'll have the teachers walk over to that lockdown area and show the kids where they will go if this is the real thing. And then we want teachers to engage with our kids and have conversations, open, honest conversations about why we're doing lockdown and what lockdown looks like when we're in a COVID world. Because if it is necessary to go in lockdown, we're going to do so, because that's the threat in front of us moment in time. And we can lock down with masks on. There will be some, especially students, who believe that there's no hope. They've seen stories on the media. They see what's happening in the country around them, maybe in their own community. And the mental health component of all this is going to challenge school districts like I believe we've never been challenged before. So while we're preparing and making sure that we're ready to respond to threat of violence or COVID, we also have to make sure that we're ready to respond with the significant mental health supports that we've been putting in place for years. We protect kids. Make sure that your kids know that there is hope and that there is opportunity and that you are the trusted adult in their life. Every child deserves that kind, caring, trusted adult that's going to make a difference. This year more than any other, I think. All of this is going to take a focused approach. Everybody's going to have a focused approach on the students in crisis. And frankly, we're going to have a focused approach on every student this year, because we don't know what COVID's going to touch. We don't know the impact of it. So we're asking a lot. And I think we all understand what we're willing to do to try to find that new normal and to try to get back on track and to continue to provide that quality of education for our kids. I have no doubt. I really believe this with all certainty. I don't think there's anything in between these two things, but COVID's either going to define us or we're going to define it. And we're not going to let this thing define us. That is not our mindset. So how do we define it? I think we follow that communication and collaboration mindset. We follow that belief that we owe it to our community of parents and kids and staff to be transparent. I think we define it when we take, proper social distancing guidelines to heart, and we actually follow through and we demand that everybody do the same. We can demand it with kindness. We can demand it with determination, and our kids and our staff will see the importance of it. It's important that we know that we're here it's important that they know we are here to protect them. I want to thank you all for the time today. It's just been a great honor to be able to present on behalf of Safe and Sound, and look forward to taking some questions.
I just want to thank you, John. That was so thought-provoking. There's obviously just so much for us to think about and try to cram into the short time that we have here today. We've got lots of questions that have come in from various channels for you. So I do want to go ahead and shift to Q&A now. So I'm going to invite Ken, who I mentioned earlier, from Allegion, who has a very specific role in education and helping schools. So Ken, if you want to go ahead and turn your video on as well, and you can join us for this moment and talk a little bit about your role. I want to thank you, Ken, for your organization's commitment to our mission at Safe and Sound Schools, and talk a little bit about the work that you do in schools, and how you're helping school communities to navigate these times as safely as possible.
Well, Michelle, hey, thank you. And Alyssa, if you can help me as well, I think I had the same problem. So here we go.
There we go.
Thanks, Alyssa. And yeah, popped on late, but John, great talk. Really appreciate that. And just everybody who's on the call, right? Everybody here cares about the students and the kids, and really are trying to figure this out and realize it's difficult times. So I just, we play a small role in the schools, but certainly nothing to the role that everyone here plays. And we're just glad to be a part of this whole thing. Real quickly, a little bit about Legion, because I think John's got a lot to bring to the table more than Legion does right now. But we're door security. He talked about at the end some of the threats, and that's really where our forte is to the perimeter security, physical security, the product Schleg or the brands that we've had. We've been around forever, but a little bit, that's kind of what we do. But who we are, we're a company that's been in this space for a long time. Some of our driving values are what John said earlier on. I made a note. I said, hey, this is a time that we have to check our ego at the door. One of our first values at Allegiant is serve others and not yourself. And that's how we approach this. So we just want to be part of a team with you. We look at, like Michelle does, we take this holistic approach to security using the past guidelines and things of that nature. So if there's something that you think or have a need in that area, please reach out to us. We have about 500 people in the field. We'd love to help you out. And again, just thank everyone for all you do. And Michelle, I'll just turn it back over to you and John and get to some of those questions. I think it's a great discussion, great presentation.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I want to just remind everybody, we'll share some of the resources from this discussion. And Ken mentioned the PASS guidelines. They're available at passk12.org. So we'll put that out in a little resource bundle following this webinar as well, too. Great resources as we're all trying to plan our way through this. But I do want to dive into some of these questions here for you, John. So many good ones. One is about considerations for special education students. Obviously, this is really near and dear to my heart. The daughter that I lost at Sandy Hook School was a special education student. And like you said, obviously our focus right now is so very heavily on keeping everybody safe through pandemic and helping our schools to be able to accommodate their objectives of teaching kids and growing kids and keeping them safe. But at the same time, we cannot abandon all of the other considerations, all of the other potential hazards that could arise in the school community. So when we think about special education students and how we're going to help them navigate this and what kind of considerations we're going to put in place for these very special students in our communities, what kinds of things have you been talking about with your team in Jeffco?
We've had a lot of conversations about our special ed staff and teachers, parents, reaching out early and talking with parents and establishing relationships and asking questions about how the kids are doing, what they need, what they're struggling with. So instead of coming back on day one and finding out that, hey, we've got a new stressor that we didn't understand or weren't aware of, let's do it early and find out so that we can help mitigate that on day one. I think that's the most important thing that we can do. And then you have to have conversations with our kids and talk to them in an honest, age-appropriate way that isn't scary, but it also helps them understand what they're trying to navigate. What I found with whoever the student is, whether a special ed or traditional student, they just want to know. They got a lot of questions. We owe them a conversation. And then I think helping them get used to and being comfortable around what the PPE is going to look like.
Yeah.
May be a real stressor for them.
I think about that all the time, honestly, because my daughter wasn't comfortable with me wearing sunglasses or a hat. It was very anxiety provoking for her. So, these little things that, we're already, miles ahead of in our planning, some of these things can be real pitfalls for our special education students. So I love your idea about let's just ask the kids. Let's talk to the families, because you're not going to be able to apply some one size fits all that addresses the needs of all autistic kids or all hearing impaired kids. You really do need to go to the source and find out what particular things are of concern to the student or of the family.
This is a wonderful way to connect. A Zoom conference call, I'll let your students see you again, get used to you again, hear your voice. I think kids need that familiarity.
I like that. And a lot of teachers I know are using the Zoom just as kind of we're going to have a conversation before we even get together in the classroom. We're going to, hey, how's it going? I'm excited to see you. I can't wait till we can be together again. Those things,
Exactly.
they go miles for sure. We have another great question about who should have the primary responsibility for enforcing new procedures, mask protocols, social distancing in the classroom. As a teacher, I really feel for my colleagues trying to figure out how they're going to keep kids off of each other and away from each other. I mean, that's just a big part of the job on the day to day. So who are we going to put in charge of that? Talk about, is the SRO going to do that? Is the principal going to do that?
Yeah, that really won't be the job of an SRO, because it's not a criminal event, right? So it's truly going to be, I think, those typically maybe a vice or assistant principal, whatever's in your community, whoever handles discipline. Hopefully the teachers, can really get that student to pay attention and wear the PPE. But you're going to have some defiant kids.
For sure.
And you're also going to have to be consistent in your practice and make sure that when you're addressing it, that you're addressing it in the same manner, so that we don't have a disparity in how we're dealing with this issue. And I think it's going to come down to, just like any other disruptive behavior. Now, this one, though, is really different, because this one, if you're that disruptive and you walk over and you start coughing on someone, you could impact their life.
Yeah.
We're not going to tolerate that. And that's going to be something we have to address immediately. And
that's making other people feel unsafe, right?
Absolutely. Every student deserves to feel safe in a school. So I think, you can address that depending on the size of your school with your current staff and administration.
I think we're also going to have to invest a lot of time in creating this culture of cooperation.
Yes.
We're going to get through this together. I really do hope that our schools are involving school counselors, school psychs, social workers in fostering this culture of cooperation. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to look the same as we return to school. For some kids, the return is virtual. For some kids, it's kind of a mix, a hybrid. Some are going back to the physical building, but it's going to be totally different. So, that culture piece is going to be so essential to ensuring that everybody is also sound, as well through this process.
Whatever we do, we better model good behavior ourselves. Kids are going to be watching us. If we got a teacher that doesn't believe in wearing a mask and they're not enforcing it, we're going to have a problem. We have to make sure every adult is engaged in this.
Without a doubt. And I think too, we've talked about this through the spring and the summer with our Tuesdays at the Table series, and now with this series, but taking care of yourself, adults in the room, I know, and there are scientific studies about this, but as the day goes on, adults tend to get more tired and more cranky and a little bit less gentle in their approach sometimes. So we want to make sure that adults are taking good care of themselves, so that they can in turn take really good care of the very important people in their charge every day. Got another question about the outdoor classroom considerations. Such a really important point. We've got, some school communities, especially at the start of the year and at the end of the year, will have the option to do some instruction outside, which we know that's going to improve the ventilation, and it's going to mitigate some of the transmissibility of the virus here. But as you mentioned, it's really important that we keep the lens of all hazards here. We have to be thinking about, okay, now if we're stepping outside, how can we face some of the other challenges? Say, child abduction is a very common, unfortunately, a very common threat that schools are addressing on the day-to-day throughout the school year. So, how can we tend to those types of things? How can we make sure too that if there is some kind of emergency, we have a version of all of those standard response protocols that you were talking about. One of our partner organizations, the I Love You Guys Foundation, has developed programs around teaching these protocols. Well, we're going to need them for outside too if we're going to be doing outside instruction. So can you speak a little bit more to those considerations?
Well, I think my big concern from a school safety aspect is truly uh, the inability then to protect your perimeter environment, like we can with a school when the doors roll shut and the kids are safe and sound in the classroom with the teachers, and the ability to lock a door if we need to. We lose all of that. Now, we also have a pretty significant public health issue that we're facing. So we have to really be prepared to do things that we've never done before. And if we have the outdoor classroom, and that's going to be a consistent practice, then schools have to have a conversation internally about what are we going to do? We have an SRO on site? Where do we want to hope to have our school resource officer positioned during the day? Do we have campus security? How will we deploy campus security both inside and outside? Typically, your elementary schools, though, don't have any of that. Your elementary schools have your staff and your administration, and administration is limited. So, from a staffing standpoint, can we hold the classroom behind a fence? Can we hold it behind the school property where we can't be seen from the curbside in front of the school? So while you may not have what we call cover, you have concealment. You're able to conceal your class and keep them in an area where they're not right out in front. And I think some of those conversations have to take place. I would recommend, though, you do bring in your local law enforcement agency and you have conversations about the neighborhood, what you could expect, what might be occurring that you don't know about, what should you be prepared for, how will you evacuate or go into lockdown, how fast can you get in the building, does it require a key or a key fob, how are you going to manage your kids that have to go to the bathroom in the building coming back and forth. That may require 2 to 3 adults for classrooms outside. You may have to deploy paras outside like you do during lunchtime.
Yeah.
So all of that is on the table and has to be discussed.
It comes back to discussion, right? It comes back to talking about it, asking the questions, bringing up these concerns and worries. It's the only way we're gonna be able to solve for safety in this situation. I like how you talked about modifying drills. This is something that is near and dear to us at Safe and Sound. We talk a lot about the hierarchy of education and training activities before you even get to a full-on drill situation. And so this is a great example of how we can still be teaching and refreshing those skills, kind of watering the seeds that we've planted, teaching kids, reminding kids of their pathways to safety should there ever be some kind of unsafe situation. So I just wanted to talk to that a little bit with you. I liked your idea of letting the kids just talk things through, maybe do table topping instead of trying to move people. Obviously, if it really is an emergency, we're going to just go like we normally would. We're going to deal with the present danger, and we're going to sort out the rest later. But yeah, the small group activities, the conversations, any other things that have come up for you guys in talking about how you're going to do this in an alternative fashion.
Well, we want our teachers to model what locks lights on a site look like. I want our teachers to
Model. It's so powerful. It's
It
just so,
is. First
yeah.
of all, I want the lockdown announcement to occur. Obviously, say it's a drill because we don't want to scare anybody.
Right.
But let everyone know we're doing a lockdown drill. Have your teacher go over and lock the door. Have your teacher shut the light off. Have your teacher say, we would go into the hard corner, and then get in front of the classroom and talk about, remember what we do. What do you do when you're in a hallway? What do you do when you're in a restroom? Let the kids answer the questions for you, so that they engage and you start their memory process and their muscle memory back up again. And I think we can rely on that muscle memory for this year. Next year, we're gonna have to go back to lockdown drills. There's different social distancing and anytime we can.
I think you're absolutely right. Well, I could talk to you about this for a long time. I think we all could, and we probably will need to come back to this conversation several times throughout the school year, John. The best practices and recommendations are changing very rapidly. Recommendations about masks and spacing and temperature checks and all of those things. And that's another thing that I think we need to keep in mind. You mentioned communication. Just making sure that we are constantly communicating with our community and just letting them know, hey, we don't have all the answers. We're trying to figure this out as we go too. So be patient. We're dealing with the information as it comes, and what we said last week might not hold next week. We have to be flexible throughout this crisis. And
single biggest failure point in any crisis I've ever been a part of or managed is the failure to communicate.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's all keep communication to the forefront here. We are so grateful to all of you for joining us and for the extra work that each and every one of you are engaging in to ensure the safety and well-being of our school communities. I want to thank Ken and the folks at Allegion for providing for our webinar today. And I want to invite folks to learn more about Allegion at allegion.com. This webinar will be archived on our Safe and Sound Schools YouTube channel shortly. We hope to see you all next week, same time and place, as our Return to Learn series continues with school health planning through the pandemic, presented by John Carroll, Executive Director of the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation, and Julie Wilkin, Director of Health Services and COVID-19 Incident Commander for Jeffco County Public Schools. We're getting lots of good stuff from Jeffco. So thank you. And until then, everybody, stay safe and well.